All right, well, this is our last panel for today. Very exciting. We're going to talk about smart cities and smart citizens. Our moderator, Jose Manuel Petisco, who's the General Director of Cisco here in Spain. And we have Isaac Martin Barbero, a good friend, who is the head of INECO, which is a engineering consultancy on mobility. And we also are going to have Scott Painter, which you heard earlier, which is one of the top serial entrepreneurs I think that I've ever met, and he is an expert in cars. Ladies and gentlemen, join me in welcoming Jose Manuel Petisco and his participants. ¿Cómo vamos de tiempo? Bien, ¿no?
Hello everyone. Oh, nice audio on the first try. So thank you for being here at near 7 p.m. So thank you very much. We appreciate a lot that and my colleagues in the panel as well. In this session about the smart cities and smart citizen on the smart mobility, I would like to share with you a very short introduction, because the important will be the dialogue between all of us. Is the challenge where we are today. In the next 10 years, we will have 70% of the world population in urban areas. So as you can imagine, this is a big challenge, because every day we have around 10,000 people moving into the cities. If we look at the worldwide level, it probably for you it's not too much, but it's a challenge for every city. If we do some basic maths, it means that every month there is a new city in the size of Santander in Spain, around 300,000 inhabitants, and you need to provide all the services there. At the same time, there is another big challenge. We have moved in the world from the competition between empires to the competition between regions of the world, then countries, and now the competition is between cities. And this competition is based in attract, develop, and retain the talent in the cities. So both things together means that we need to provide the right services on the cities to attract, retain this talent, and also to provide the services for all those people that is coming to those cities. And mobility is one of the key ones. If you have to build a new city every month in the world, you have to provide, of course, homes. You have to provide healthcare. You have to provide education, and you have to provide mobility for these 300,000 people in the new city. So this is a big challenge, and also it's a great opportunity. Talking about mobility will mean on the total investment that we can do for this city, around 8% of investment of this new city. So it's a huge business, and it's a huge opportunity as well. So moving into the panelists, first I would like to apologize Luis Cueto from the City Council of Madrid. He should be here also in the panel, but he has to leave for some urgent reason, and he cannot join with us. But he shared with me that please share with the audience that Madrid is probably, as the famous beer, probably the best city in terms of electric mobility, because we have a couple of companies providing electric car service, share service, that in comparison with other cities in the world, you don't have to pick up the car in the station and leave the car in the station. You can pick up where the car is and leave it where you want. And also, the Bici Madrid, the famous service, is also electrical, so it's a big difference between some other cities and capitals of Europe. And last but not least, they are going to implement some restrictions for access to the center of the city in order to improve the quality of all the citizens and smart citizens that live in Madrid. So Luis cannot be with us, but he asked me to share with you all those things. So talking about our two panelists, I would like to ask to Isaac Martin Barbero, that is the CEO of Ineco. I would like to start with you, Isaac, asking about the experience of your company that has been working in mobility for the last 45 years, that it's big time. So you have all the past experience, but also you are working in projects for the future. And how do you see the mobility in this challenging environment that we are having with the growth in the cities and the expectations of the smart citizens that has huge expectations about mobility in every city?
Okay, well, thank you very much, Jose. It's great to be here and to be with you and with Scott at this panel. I think that being almost a 50-year-old company places us in a very good position to see the direction in which mobility has changed through the last decades. At least in Spain, until 30 or 40 years ago, mobility was all about cars. Then 30 to 25 years ago, railway came into fashion once more, and it was all about high-speed railway. 10 years later, that's 20 years back, it was about airport connectivity within the country and of the country with other places as well. And today what we're seeing is that there is an increasing demand in city transportation. So we see that there's been a shift somehow from a focus which was mainly in connections between cities to a focus whereby the fun, the innovation, all the new things are mostly happening related to mobility and transportation within the city. By the way, we used to talk about transportation, now we talk about mobility, just to make sure that we put into the equations new modes of transportation, but also that we put into the equation the fact that we are seeing transportation increasingly torn apart from the kind of things that we used to see it linked to, and I think Scott will talk a lot about that later. So the way we see it evolving is that there is going to be a lot happening in as far as cities are concerned, as far as urban settlements are concerned, and that there's a new trend which is already going on, which is mobility as a service. But we see new things coming, and that's very much related to the citizen, which is not just staying there at mobility as a service, but also bringing into the equation externalities and how the way I use my own mobility or my decisions in mobility affect others. And that has a lot to do with what the intelligent citizen. That is an intelligent, not just a connected citizen, not just someone that is able to move or to use the information, but someone who has a bidirectional relationship with the environment as well. So I think that mobility as a system, also from a perspective that takes into account PPP cooperation, is something in some area in which we will see new things happening in the near future.
So thank you. You said mobility as a system, and I know that Scott is very, very vocal about the disruption of the automotive industry and moving to mobility as a service, or mobility as a new business with new business model. So can you comment a little bit what means mobility as a service, because it's
it's interesting. So I've got a partner in my business. His name is George Bauer. George comes to the same problem from a completely different point of view. I come to the problem recognizing all the consumer pain points around buying, owning, and selling a car. He comes to it from the automotive industry, where he ran Mercedes Credit Corporation, BMW Financial Services, and Tesla Financial Services. And really, the automotive boardroom today, given autonomous cars and ride sharing, is really thinking about survival. And the interesting problem is that the only way that the car companies and the incumbents are going to survive truly, the only way that the existing car companies really do survive is they have to really change their business model. Today they are in the manufacturing and retailing business, which is by definition a margin compression business over time. The problem is when you have companies like Tesla and Uber and the rise of these new business models, it really threatens their very survival. So they have to rethink how are they going to exist and persist with customers down the road, but they have a real problem. Car companies tend to not be loved by consumers. It's just a high friction relationship at the point of retail. And so if you're going to get into a recurring revenue business model, which is a customer for life, you're going to have to find a way to really jump from this highly confrontational selling model to one of really enlisting and making the customer's life more simple and, at the end of the day, less costly. So really, I think there's a very interesting sort of mobility question. Mobility is a very big portion of just about everybody on the planet's total budget. About 14% of what you earn in gross income is spent on mobility, and it doesn't matter where you live on the planet. And while that's changing, it's highly complex, it requires a lot of attention, and right now, it is financed primarily with consumer debt and credit card. And so I think there is a really interesting question about how, in an age where we're all using smartphones and mobile adoption is no longer really an issue, that is absolutely the platform for simplification. Can we create user interfaces and experiences that solve for this? And the automotive industry, and where George comes from, this survival instinct, and where I come from, this I want to create really good solutions for consumers that create value for us as an enterprise, I think land on, first and foremost, we've got to rewrite the rules of the relationship. Can we get to no commitment? Can we get to what I want, when I want, without having to actually use 20% of my net worth to go out and get access to it? And I think that's really the big impediment. This idea that you're not going to have to use your own capital to finance a depreciating asset frees up a lot of the frustration, the complexity, and the hurdle of being able to access all of these things. And it doesn't matter whether we're talking about the car or any of the other things, and now ride sharing, it's still, that all sort of piles into that 14+%. Really financing that and being able to be a way for the customer to do that simply is a huge opportunity, and it also allows us to help direct how the consumer is going to use and access that entire system. It is the beginning of a smart grid because you're talking about utilization.
Yeah, great disruption, huh?
Big disruption. If we're right, the idea that consumers go out and, this is a crazy thing. For 100 years, the car business has completely sidestepped all of the risk of a depreciating asset and all of that volatility. And you backstage had asked me a question about artificial intelligence and how is it going to affect all of this. And when you really think about it, artificial intelligence is nothing more than predictive analytics, pattern recognition, being applied to big data and transparent markets. So we have all of the ingredients for artificial intelligence. The idea that today, with a simple scan of your driver's license, we know more about you than any underwriter of a consumer loan has ever known about any consumer in history. And we can find out instantly. We know your credit score, we know your income, your disposable income, we even know if you're a dog person or a cat person. And we haven't actually done a hard check of your credit. So the state of technology is such that we know so much. Why even give you the credit? Because that's not what we want to take risk on. It's an entirely different bet. So consumer debt goes away in the auto space and the mobility space in favor of access fees. Pay for what you want when you want, because it turns out everybody can afford it. They can just afford a different level.
Good, thank you, Scott. Isaac, you have commented about PPP, public-private partnership. How do you see, or what learnings do you have in your experience about the use of that kind of project based on PPP, and especially on the mobility project? What is your experience in this sense?
Well, I think that our experience can be summarized quite briefly. On the one hand, as far as connectivity between cities goes, PPP is a fairly standardized business, even if it's an evolving one, moving away, slightly away from toll models into paying for availability or a combination of both of them. But there seems to be clear models, and there seems to be a clear shared framework of how to actually structure those deals. On the other hand, the mismatch that we find today is that mobility within cities is increasingly important, that smart solutions, to which Scott just referred a minute ago, are more widespread within cities than they are in other forms of mobility, yet it's still very difficult to structure PPP models within urban mobility solutions. I think that if you look at the state of the art and the discussions that you find within the, I would say, traditional financial sector, because Scott told me a minute ago that he's actually more or less a fintech company on wheels, right? Yeah. To some extent, in the traditional guys, they have still trouble trying to figure out how to structure PPP deals when it comes to urban mobility. And they're part of the answer to that might be the fact of that private sector and companies such as Scott seem to be faster and much more effective at using something that's still considered a side product of mobility for the traditional players, which is basically the data. I think that PPPs within cities, in the field of city mobility, will basically take off once the deals are structured by taking advantage of the data, which to a very large extent are still neglected today. And I think it's fair to say that in order for that to happen, we need to ask ourselves whether we have the right legal frameworks, at least in Europe, in terms of publicity of the data, of those data, in terms of property of those data, access, etc. But the way we see it, it's a promising field, but there are still some questions to be answered, and they could be answered fairly quickly, but they're still not completely settled.
Thank you, thank you. So you have mentioned one technology, and I would like to dig in on that, because I'm passionate about technology. So you has shared with us about artificial intelligence, AI. What other technologies that are now happening all across this event and some others, like blockchain or machine learning or big data or analytics, how those technologies will impact your view on the mobility as a service?
Sure. It's interesting. The headlines always go to artificial intelligence or autonomous cars. In reality, I think all of these things are sequential and progressive. They are, autonomous cars are, there's 5 levels of autonomous cars. The car that drives itself that does not have a steering wheel is a long way away. And it's probably not a car that many of us will drive in the next 5 or 10 years, but if you do, it'll be a new car, and it will not be a used car, because the used cars aren't going away. They're non-autonomous. But what is for sure is that cars are going to stay in their lane. They're going to park themselves and not ding other cars. They're going to control their speed. They're going to prevent accidents. They'll be safer. So we'll see progressive advancements technologically. Cars will just become a much safer thing versus where they are today, which is why insurance is so necessary. And so insurance will be significantly impacted. But this idea of artificial intelligence is fascinating because what it allows you to do is really change automotive credit as an asset class, but only if you actually apply all of the things that lead up to it being truly artificial intelligence. Because artificial intelligence is about the machine making a better decision than the human would make. And right now, credit underwriting is a very human, speculative decision, and there's usually somebody involved that says, yeah, lend that consumer money, or let's, based on these set of facts, lend them money. Whereas, because we own the asset in our business, we're simply saying, all we need to know is, can they afford it? If we can see into your bank account, if we can see your credit history, we know whether or not you can afford it. And if we've created a relationship that says, if for some reason there's no money in your bank account next month, we notify you and you return the car. We don't destroy your credit. We don't default on a loan. We simply want our car back. It's our asset. And so there is just a very interesting sort of way to think of these things as very progressive, but it would not be possible if you didn't have perfect information on how the wholesale and retail markets behaved. We see that transaction data today. It's latent data, but it's perfect data. And you can now apply that to really, through pattern recognition and machine learning, understanding and predicting behavior with very high degrees of accuracy. But the biggest variable in the equation in terms of how to underwrite all of this stuff is what is the future value of the asset? And you have to just take the leap that we have the ability mathematically to predict the future value of a car, new, used, now, and any time in the future to the penny, accurately. And if you can do that, why would you push the risk off to somebody else? Because you can perfectly price that risk. So if you can perfectly price it, the question becomes, what's the appropriate fee to charge for it? And so everybody becomes the winner. We're at a place today where it really has been about amassing the amount of data required. It's not about intelligence or very deep logic that's going to be able to figure this out. It is just studying the data that's currently available, and it's never been available before. So we're at I think it's probably the most interesting time, certainly in the automotive century, to be an innovator, an entrepreneur in automotive. So much is changing, and because companies like Uber and Tesla and others have made so much money for their shareholders so quickly and been so disruptive, it's created ideologues out of almost every venture capitalist on the planet. Everybody I meet, I mean, they literally start out these conversations with, we don't think people are going to own cars anymore. I mean, I'm that guy out on the ledge saying, absolutely people are going to own cars, if not only for the emotional reasons, but there is just too much physics behind the fact that cars aren't going away. People aren't just going to walk away from their cars. So I think that, you know, the cool news is artificial intelligence, as we refer to it, is here today. It needs to be applied to these business cases. And we're not going to be the only company offering flexible ownership options. You're about to see an explosion of businesses that will offer all of the value propositions that we've landed on in various ways, but it's going to require that they take principal risk and use all of this data in an artificial intelligence type way.
Thank you, Scott. So Isaac, moving again to your experience, how do you see the difference between projects in smart mobility between Spain and Europe and other parts of the world, like let's say North America, or South America, or Asia Pac? It's difference between the projects, or all these areas of the world has the same approach to those projects?
Well, thank you for narrowing down the question, because if you had stopped before the last question, I would have wondered whether we would have 2 or 3 days to discuss the topic. No, I think mobility is one of the aspects in which you can tell faster the difference in the way people live. It might not be by chance that Scott mentioned that just by scanning the driving license you can tell a lot about a person. And it might also be, they might have something to do with that, the fact that Scott thinks that cars still will be around. No, I think that at the end of the day, mobility has a lot to do with the way we live, with the way that we use the resources, and you can't compare that. Just to give you a very brief example, Europe, the railway is in good health and getting stronger. That's not the case in the US necessarily. That's not the case in the whole of the American continent, where connectivity among between big distances is done either by car or by plane. In places like Africa, people are giving up on the idea of building the roads that you would think that should be coming with the increase in their incomes. And there are some projects which basically see future connectivity directly through planes. We didn't talk about drones so far, or drones or other aspects. Absolutely not. I think we see big differences, and that's why whenever we look into a specific country, increasingly we try to look for a specific mode of transportation in which we can effectively add more value. And how do we do that? Well, basically we try to bank on our own experience, and we try to choose those places that have more similarities with the way in which we have developed our own transportation modes.
Thank you, thank you. Last week I saw the new mobility taxi in Dubai, that is a mix between a drone and a taxi for two people. I don't know if I will be able to use one of those shortly. But talking about that kind of innovation in the mobility, what are your first target in your proposal for smart mobility as a service? It's the millennials, the baby boomers, or who is who are the first target?
When we started the company, first of all, the name of the company is FAIR, and that's a high bar. I mean, if you're going to call your company FAIR, everything you do better be fair. From your pricing to your product to your interaction with your customers, your partners, your employees. And I think that we built it initially with a modern consumer, a millennial consumer in mind, somebody who's starting their lives, needing a car, and all the benefits that having a car that they own and control comes with. But what we've learned is that there's actually 3 different customer cases for us. It works very well for the low end of the market where somebody has little to no credit, because we're not giving them a loan to buy a car. We don't actually have to discriminate or bias against them because they have bad credit. If they have enough money in their bank account and they have enough money coming in and they can afford a smaller car or a smaller monthly payment, we can give them a car that's priced right for them. And the used car market is large enough and has enough liquidity that that's an exciting sort of segment of the market that we appeal to. Over 70% of the cars on our system are priced under $500. About 30% are under $200. It's a very interesting thing when you look at access to a vehicle and mobility. Bringing the cost down makes other customer segments available. And then the biggest surprise of all, and I affectionately sort of refer to them internally as the douchebags, but people who want to buy really nice cars, Bentleys and Range Rovers, and are willing to spend thousands of dollars a month on a car, love what we're doing because it's so much easier. Tax, title, registration, and the paperwork and the complexity of owning a car is annoying, and it's annoying for everybody. And so the ability to be able to just say, I'm going to pay for the ability to have an SUV in the winter and a convertible in the summer, and I'll pay that exchange fee. So it really works for both ends of the market and everybody in between, but it was built with a millennial in mind. And by the way, I was just going to comment on the last question. I think what's really fascinating, if you think about sort of the history of mobility, there's been only one transportation system that's ever been truly disrupted, the horse. Everything else has survived everything else's introduction. So it's not like when the taxi came along, buses went away or trains stopped running. I think that all of these things work in a very, very healthy sort of system that can float everybody, because you've got such a huge growing population. I think as people do move into urban areas, having more options and creating optionality is going to be fantastic, not the other way around. And I don't think that it's likely that any of these technologies completely disrupts everything else.
So thank you very much. Time is up. I will ask the people to a warm applause to Isaac and to Scott. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.